1993. No one truly knew which martial art really worked. Was it punching power, wrestling strength, or pure technique? To answer that question, the most dangerous experiment in combat sports history was created. UFC 1. There were no rules, no weight classes, no rounds. 8 fighters entered the arena in a single night, and only one would remain standing. Boxers, karate practitioners, and wrestlers all believed their style was superior, and the crowd favored the biggest, most destructive fighters, until a quiet, slender man stepped forward. Royce Gracie trusted technique over strength, took his opponents to the ground, controlled them, and forced them to submit one by one. That night, the world learned a hard truth. Real fighting doesn't only happen on the feet. UFC 1 wasn't just a tournament, it was the birth of modern MMA, and the moment combat sports changed forever. 2009. Everything had changed. There were rules, champions, and a global audience holding its breath, because this wasn't just another event, it was the peak of an era, UFC 100. Tens of thousands filled the arena, millions watched worldwide, and for the first time in UFC history, expectations reached unprecedented levels. Legends shared the same card, titles were defended, and careers were defined. Brock Lesnar reminded the world what raw power looked like, while Georges St. Pierre delivered a near-perfect performance, proving he wasn't just one of the best, he was the best. That night, more than fights were won. The UFC became a global phenomenon. MMA entered the mainstream, and there was no turning back. UFC 100 wasn't about proving legitimacy. It was about leaving a permanent mark on history. 2016. This was both a celebration and a test. When UFC 200 arrived, the expectations were as heavy as the card itself. At the center of the night stood the women's bantamweight title. Miesha Tate gave everything she had, but Amanda Nunes stormed in like a force of nature, claiming the belt and ushering in a new era. Moments later, two legends collided as Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar fought a battle of speed and timing, ending with Aldo's flawless knockout that reminded everyone he still belonged at the top. In a last-minute main event change, Daniel Cormier defended his title against a short-notice Anderson Silva, where experience, courage, and tactics clashed inside the cage. One of the night's most talked-about moments came with Brock Lesnar's return, as he imposed his power in wrestling against Mark Hunt and shook the octagon once again. UFC 200 didn't tell a single story. It showcased champions changing hands, legends sharing the stage, and the true depth of the organization. 2017. Under the lights of Madison Square Garden, it was clear history would be written in a single night. This was UFC 217. In the main event, Georges St. Pierre returned after years away to face middleweight champion Michael Bisping, not just for a title, but for his legacy. His third-round victory became one of the greatest comebacks in MMA history. Another shock followed as the bantamweight title changed hands. Cody Garbrandt's speed and confidence met TJ Dillashaw's perfect timing, and the knockout elevated their rivalry into legend. But perhaps the most stunning moment came when the seemingly unbeatable Joanna Jedrzejczyk was dethroned. Rose Namajunas captured the title with a first-round knockout that silenced the world. UFC 217 wasn't just about belts, it was about perception, rebirth, and a single night that reshaped MMA history. 2018. Las Vegas was charged with electricity because this wasn't just a fight, it was a reckoning, fueled by years of hostility. UFC 229. In the main event, undefeated champion Khabib Nurmagomedov faced Conor McGregor, the man who turned MMA into global spectacle. One represented discipline, pressure, and relentless control. The other embodied chaos, words, and unshakable confidence. The arena was sold out, millions watched worldwide, and when the cage door closed, the world waited for the outcome. As the fight unfolded, Khabib's suffocating grappling took over. McGregor resisted, but in the fourth round, he was forced to submit. Yet the night didn't end there. After the final bell, chaos erupted, spilling beyond the cage into one of the most infamous moments in MMA history. UFC 229 shattered records, crossed the boundaries of sport, and proved that MMA was about more than just fighting. 2024. This wasn't just a number, it was the UFC confronting its own legacy. When UFC 300 arrived, the weight of history came with it. In the main event, light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira faced Jamal Hill and delivered a devastating first-round knockout that reminded the world what true power looked like. On the same night, history was made in the women's strawweight division as Zhang Weili dominated Yan Xiaonan, cementing her reign as champion. But the soul of the event belonged to the BMF title fight, Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje. Their war ended with a last-second knockout that instantly became one of the most iconic moments in MMA history. UFC 300 wasn't defined by a single fight, but by its knockouts, title bouts, and unforgettable moments. A night that proved why the UFC reached 300 and why it still stands at the top. 2024. This time, the octagon wasn't placed in a traditional arena. It was built inside the future itself. UFC 306 transformed combat sports by taking place inside the Las Vegas Sphere. Massive screens, cinematic visuals, and immersive technology turned the event into a living film. While fighters battled for titles, rankings, and careers inside the cage, audiences witnessed a presentation never before seen in sports history. Every strike felt heavier, every moment more epic. The UFC didn't just redefine fighting, it redefined how it's experienced. UFC 306 Sphere wasn't about honoring the past, it was a declaration of the future. And now imagine this. The heart of American power, one of the most secure and symbolic locations in the world, transformed under the lights, as the octagon is placed not in an arena, but in front of the White House itself. This is where sport meets power, tradition collides with chaos. UFC White House. The world's greatest fighters step into the cage under the eyes of history and global cameras. This isn't just a fight card, it's a statement. Every punch echoes, every takedown feels like a manifesto, because victory here is not only against an opponent, but against history itself. UFC White House wouldn't show how big the sport has become, it would show how far it can go.